Okay. Call the meeting to order. We have Rebecca here to swear in board members who were recently reappointed. Stephanie and Ramon.
Oh, did you press record?
Everyone needs to be on the mic for this.
One of you has to.
Do you have to use mine?
I do, yes. But it wasn't recorded.
Okay, we are swearing in Stephanie Bennett and Ramon Garcia today. So if the two of you could please stand. And then repeat after me. I state your name.
I, Stephanie Bennett,
I, Ramon Garcia,
Do solemnly swear or affirm
do solemnly swear or affirm
that I will support and defend
that
that I will support and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the
the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California
and
and the Constitution of the State of California
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
that
I will bear true faith and allegiance
to the Constitution of the United States
to the
to the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California,
and the Constitution of the State of California,
that I take this obligation freely
that I take this obligation freely
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
and that I will well and faithfully discharge
and
and that I will well and faithfully discharge
the duties upon which I am about to enter.
the
the duties upon which I am about to enter. Thank you.
Okay, congratulations.
I just need your signatures on both of those, and I need the, I don't. Thank you. Someone else need a pen? Hold on to this one.
So looking at the next agenda item, election of officers. I'm currently chair. I'm not sure who is vice chair.
That's a good question. I don't know.
The website says Stephanie.
Oh, here I am. It's me.
And I've been chair for a number of years now, and I would be happy to relinquish that and would, accept any nominations for chair.
Why are you looking at me? I'm good.
I nominate Bob Bundy for chair.
You're really good at it, Bob.
Yeah, I
Second.
think anyone has
Okay.
a burning desire.
For vice chair,
Someone else is welcome to do it. I've done it, so. Anyone interested?
I'm not interested because I'm not sure if I'm going to be living in Corte Madera in the next year.
Shocking. I'll volunteer for vice.
Perfect.
okay.
All right, Mr. Bell.
Does he need to be nominated rather than just raising his hand and say, I'll do it?
You all should second a motion and make it a motion.
Okay. Somebody make it a motion?
Do we have to motion you first?
No. I think one of the members needs to make it a motion.
Okay. I make a motion for David Bell to be the vice chair. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Yep.
I second.
Perfect.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, David. Okay, moving right along.
Chair Bundy, if I may, before you go to open forum for non-agenda items, if it pleases the board, staff would like to consider moving item B, 8B, in front of 8A, if that's okay with the board.
Yes.
Yes, sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Open forum for non-agenda items. Anything? No members of the public? Going to item 5, our new senior civil engineers. Do you want to introduce them and talk about Jared and RJ?
Chair Bundy, I'll do that briefly, but I'm going to actually allow them to tell you a little bit about their backgrounds and interests. I will say that, I believe Jared came on in May and RJ in early June, and so they've only been here a short period of time, but I believe that their impact has already been felt in terms of the number of projects they're taking on. Neither of them have complained to me that they don't have enough to do, so that's a good thing. But yeah, just briefly on your education or technical training and interest, and then we'll go on to the next item.
All right, thank you, Peter. My name is Jared Barrio, Senior Civil Engineer. I graduated Cal Poly in Architectural Engineering, and I've been working in the private sector up in Santa Rosa for the last 10 years. I've come down to Corte Madera to have a lot of fun with the flood control systems and Sanitary District 2 excitement, among other things here. So I'm excited to be part of the team, the new team, and all led by Peter. So, yeah.
Thanks for getting that arbor project completed. I thought that was going to languish for another year. Thank you.
My pleasure. It's almost wrapped up.
Yeah.
It's near completion.
Hi, and I'm RJ Suko. Most recently spent 10 years working for the County of Marin in the engineering division. Prior to that, spent a couple years in consulting, and before that, went to school at UC Davis studying civil engineering. Definitely excited to be here. I'll be the staff lead for the flood control board, so happy to continue to get up to speed and try to tackle some of these, I think, difficult challenges we have in front of us. So, but excited for the challenge and look forward to working with you all.
Okay, excellent. Did everybody get a chance to look at the meeting minutes from March 12th? Is there any corrections, additions, changes? Is there a move to approve?
Just a very, very minor, but in page 2, 1, 2, the third paragraph, it should be alternatives analysis. So with an S at the end, it's not analysis. It's not an alternative analysis, but analysis of several alternatives. It's minor.
Okay. Anything else? Approved with that change?
Motion to approve.
Second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Measure F? Approved?
Start this one.
Yeah, so as I'm sure you're aware, there were 2 recent changes. Measure F was approved, which added a additional quarter-cent sales tax, and then it also it ended the prior special drainage tax. So those go into effect on October 1st for the sales tax addition, and then as of June 30th, a little over a month ago, the special sales tax measure ended.
So just to clarify, the special drainage tax ended on June 30th, and the Measure F goes into effect October 1st. And so for those of you interested in terms of dollar amounts, we on average would bring in around $640,000, $650,000 through the special drainage tax, the flood protection tax. And that was paid for by every property owner in town. And when we did the math on transferring that revenue stream to an additional sales tax measure, we're looking at additional money around 1.25 if we measure conservatively, closer to $1 million in extra sales tax revenue. And the community and the council all expressed interest in using a significant portion of those new funds for the same purpose, the flood control system. So, that's kind of a net gain for the town in terms of overall revenue, as long as sales tax revenue continues to be strong. And then, it actually ends up being a little bit of a savings to property owners in terms of their end of the year tax bill. So we'll continue to monitor the revenue stream and of course appropriate it, allocate it to the projects that are most deserving in terms of the flood control system.
Yeah.
So.
And no expiration date.
That's correct, Chair Bundy. So the way that the language was written, it's certainly in the hands of the voters. It's a voter initiative, and I think the term we'll use in there until repealed or changed by voters. So the voters can certainly put it back on the ballot at any time in the future and take another vote at it. So
Yeah.
Is there going to be a master kind of a plan that the town is going to have for that 1.25 million a year? As far as what allocations across the board, like what fire safety, parks and rec, things like that, right?
yeah, that actually just happened. The budget, the annual budget was recently approved, and so that is what I would refer to as kind of our master plan
Yeah.
for the allocations. I do think that the overall budget for the whole town is in that $18 to $20 million range for all of our activities. This is obviously just honing in on one specific source. The sales tax revenue, we were collecting around $2.5 million, and now we're hoping to collect $3.5 million. But certainly the Citizens Oversight Committee will continue to report annually on our use of that money.
Okay, thanks, Peter.
Yeah.
Consideration of floodboard size.
Thank you, Chair Bundy. Item 7B is one for discussion for your board. If you have any preferences about sticking with a 7-member board, we currently have one vacancy, as all of you know. Eli Beckman's been elected to town council, and so he's no longer on the flood board. We have a couple of different routes we can take. We can actively recruit and look to keep a 7-member board. We can also, at your direction and decision, look to amend the bylaws to go to a 5-member board. It's typical in a lot of cities that, planning commissions and advisory boards match the town council in terms of size. I haven't quite seen a place where, the planning commission is significantly larger than the town council or any of the advisory boards. And it's also a little easier to manage a smaller board. There's more room for comment from those that are there. And so it's just something that I am interested in your all thoughts on whether or not you see any value in going to a 5-member board.
And you were thinking of a 5-member board by attrition rather than drawing straws to see who would have to drop off.
Correct. Yeah, we don't need to vote anyone off the island. We can wait for any kind of a natural activity to occur. Someone might move out of town or any other reason when their term expires.
Okay.
So,
Thoughts, anyone? Keith?
I think 5 is a nice number, actually. I don't think I've been to one meeting where all 7 have been there, and I've only been on the board I think about a year now, so so 5 seems like a reasonable number. Is there actually 6 officially right now, Bob?
Yes.
Okay. As far as my situation, we're planning on putting our home on the market in March, for instance, and so I don't know where we're going to land. We're looking around as far as a condominium or townhouse. We're just going to downsize. So that, as far as my role, I think I'm pretty solid, and I'd like to stay on through March or April at least, and maybe stay on after that depending upon where we land.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Raymond?
No, I don't have any strong opinion one way or another. I guess that the quorum needed for a 5 board member would be easier to achieve. I would be okay either way.
Mm-hmm. David?
Yeah, in agreement with 5, and based on the quorum challenge.
Stephanie?
I'm fine with 5, but if one person can't come, then we can't have the meeting. Is that correct?
No, 3 would be a
Oh,
quorum.
it's just 3. Okay, I'm fine with it.
Yeah, my thought was that in the past, this board had had some people that were on with a specific agenda or wanted to follow a particular item and wanted to push their pet project. But the current board has been fairly diverse with a lot of interesting different backgrounds that all contribute to it. I think I had thought that if we had board members that brought a particular expertise and knowledge and had a real interest, that we would keep it at 7, but listening to the other comments, I could see 5. I think the flood board, we tend to have a little less discussion than you do at the planning commission or the town council, but we also want to make it as easy as possible on the staff. So, but maybe I think the bylaws say up to 7 or up to 11. I can't even really remember what it actually was when it was set up. Do you remember?
Chair Bundy, I don't, but what I would suggest we do, based on the conversation that we heard, is bringing a future item back that will formalize, your chance to vote on a 5-person board. If we need to amend the bylaws, we could do that at a future meeting. If the bylaw language is broad enough, then we can just make it a current policy of the board.
Yeah, I think it's not required. It's either up to 7 or something along those lines. So we may just let it attrition down to 5 and see how that works. And then, if it turned out we thought we would need some additional particular expertise that was available, we could reconsider that. Okay.
Good enough.
San Clemente Station repairs.
I'm gonna have Jared start the first item off.
All right, so this will be nice and short and sweet. Basically on the left, you can see the San Clemente pump station that we have, and it houses 3 pumps for transmitting stormwater. And currently, we have a pump. The pump number 2 is taken apart for its standard, typical repair and service. That's done every 8 to 10 years on average. And the pump itself is pretty old. It's from the late 70s, so it's about a 40-year-old pump. It's at the end of its life, or toward the end of its lifespan. So we've had a repair company pull it apart and diagnose it and give us a couple options to move forward. Option 1 is to repair it and service it, which is about $85,000. With a lead time of about 7 weeks to do the work and get it back in place and functioning. And then option 2 is to replace it outright with a brand new one, and that's $240,000, so significantly more. And the big kicker on the replacement is the lifespan, or the lead time for the pump, which is about 6 months. So we'd be without that pump for the remainder of this year into rainy season. So due to the cost and the lead time, we're going to proceed with asking council for the $85,000 necessary to service and repair that pump number 2. So we're going to bring that to town council at the August 21st meeting.
So that was 85,000.
Correct.
Oh.
Versus 240. Can I ask you how many horsepower that motor is?
I have, sure.
Is the motor being repaired, or is it the pump itself?
Both. It's a 150 HP motor,
Right.
a Johnson 36 PO propeller pump.
And just to add a little bit to what Jared said, this was a little unforeseen for us as we were developing our capital improvement program. We do think we have sufficient funds in the overall category of flood control in the capital improvement program. But what we'll likely do when we come to council is look to prioritize this project, add it to the CIP, and look at one of our other projects that maybe had funding in the 5-year frame, but not funding in this particular year, so that there would be a net 0 impact overall to our CIP. Mm-hmm. That's our current thought, anyway.
Mm-hmm. So the newer pump would be more energy efficient, less electricity use, long life expectancy?
I'm not sure about that. My understanding is they're just replacing it with a equal power pump. I don't know, maybe.
No, I mean, if it was a $240,000 new pump, this would be basically the same type of pump?
It'd be the same replacement, like
Oh.
for like, sort of,
Okay.
is my understanding.
I think-
I'm not sure if
So the reason, I guess, this line of questioning is I used to work at PG&E, and they have incentive programs to put in the most efficient motor made. For instance, the motor could be 2 or 3% more efficient if it's premium efficiency versus standard efficiency. And there's a life cycle cost analysis that you can do to see what the payback period would be, or ROI would be, to invest it in a higher cost yet more efficient unit. And then on top of that, there's variable speed drives. So my question would be, are these 3 constant speed motors?
I'm not 100% sure.
Do you tend to stage them? In other words, you run 1, or if it's really, really a bad downpour, then you run 2?
Yeah, that's typically the way these work. So,
Right, so it's staged.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess my thought is, and oftentimes the most efficient way to run these systems is to run one of them at variable speed. And then once you reach that maximum flow rate of that first unit, then you start up the second constant speed motor, and then you run the first motor again at variable speed to maximize the efficiency of the flow rate. So in other words, what you're going to do is you're going to run one motor throttled, right, or whatever, and so control the pressure. So I guess my point is there's a way to design systems like this where you optimize your efficiency, and if there's enough electricity consumed and the cost is enough, you can pay yourself. And since it's like a 30-year investment, you're going to oftentimes make a lot of money running a more efficient system. It's called life cycle cost analysis. So, I would recommend that the town of Corte Madera really start to look at this as a good way to run a system as opposed to lowest first cost, which is what we're talking about right now.
Thank you for those comments, Board Member Forsman. And just to be aware, we're, at least certainly I am, I can't speak for RJ or Jared, but I've spent a lot of my career doing LCA. So it's a big part of everything we consider. We also have to consider the upfront capital costs. And I think what Jared might not have mentioned is when we looked into it and we talked with the manufacturer on this, these pumps typically do have that 40-year lifespan, and they typically get serviced around 3 times during that period. This one has been serviced twice, and so it is state of the practice to give it one more servicing and expect that 8 to 10 year extension of it. That's one thing for you all to know. Another thing is that we don't often use these 2 of these 3 pumps at the same time. 95% of the time, 1 pump is sufficient.
Mm-hmm.
So it's got to be a pretty big event for us to engage 2 pumps, and I don't know for sure, but I believe that the 3rd pump is just in case one of the others goes out. So a lot of this is redundancy in the system in case we have a failure, which right now 1 pump is disassembled, the other is in need of repair. So we are currently, as we speak, we only have 1 functional pump at this location. Is that correct, Jared?
That is correct, yeah.
So, so the other one we need to get back online, and this one needs, full repair or full replacement.
So how's the 3rd pump doing?
It's doing great, like a charm.
In place.
Yeah.
But I agree that you need at least 2, because it sounds like you need 1, regularly, and not at capacity though. So the other one is still going to be your backup. I guess I would just recommend after maybe the second time we do this maintenance, which sounds like the right answer at this point, we're going to do the second maintenance or repair for $85K. But let's look at these. And I was trying to work on that with the previous town engineer.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Kelly. I thought there was a good idea for us to take a good look at all of these units and find out how efficient the motors are, what the state of the art is, how often they run, things like that, and try to calculate a repair versus replace dynamic, and that's really best practice out there. There's a lot of good written justification for doing that, where you put a tag on the motor, you say, don't repair this thing. This thing is really ripe for replacement.
Right.
And because there's a lot of rewind because it's the lowest first cost, and so we just have to get past that.
Understood and agreed.
Cool.
The other thing I'll say briefly is that when we talked about Measure F earlier, when I came in December of last year, 7 months old, 8 months old here, one of the things that really impressed me was that most of the investments in your flood control system all happened around the same time, between the mid-'80s and the mid-'90s. And so The point that you're making over the next 5 to 8 years, I see a great opportunity for a replacement at higher efficiency levels. Next gen technology is available for these stations, and so we'll definitely be seeking all the efficiencies we can get as we replace and repair our system.
Good news.
Okay.
I guess I have a question. How do we establish the funding source of an R&R project versus a capital improvement project? Do they come from different funding?
Yeah, well, what we did have before, and I believe our balance is running down, we had one dedicated funding source. The special drainage tax was a source of funds that we could use for any flood control related project. I believe that one of the projects you'll be hearing about shortly is taken $500,000 or some odd amount of our flood control tax. So I think the short answer to your question is, working with finance department and working with council, a lot of times we'll mix and match on our funding sources. I think going forward, the sales tax measure is going to be a big funding source for these type of projects. So, grants are pretty tough to come by for these improvements. So, yeah, the funding source is typically going to be sales tax measures.
But there's not necessarily a separation what is a regular operation budget versus major improvements or replacement of big facilities. There's not necessarily such a differentiation.
I believe our budget looks at both. So the budget we just adopted has, ongoing revenue, and then it has a capital portion for both the town and the sanitary district. So what we did back in June, when I think we ran via email at least, ran the CIP by you all. Those numbers we took to council, and the council approved, our estimate of what our CIP would cost. And we had two categories. We had one for this year. In other words, those numbers that were by June 30th, 2019, those had to be in the budget. But our entire CIP looked out for 4 extra years, and we don't necessarily have all the money we need to fund everything in there. So I would say those numbers serve as cost estimates as opposed to like allocations of money. So right now, we're working on an annual basis. Going forward, we may look at a 2-year basis for budget, in which case, we're going to have to look out a little further in terms of where revenues are coming from and what projects they'll be allocated to.
And I guess in part the reason why I'm asking this is because for the regular operational R&R projects, it's relatively common to just replace in kind, or either repair, but if you're going to replace, you replace in kind. So yes, you may take the latest equipment that has state-of-the-art technology, whether the motor or the panel or the pump itself. But for the capital improvement, what you do is you do an overall analysis of the facility, and that's where the other component that was being brought up before regarding how are we operating the facility, without respect to the latest model that needs to be installed in there. Is that how are we throttling the station? Are we using start triangle soft start as opposed to a VFD? Is the VFD can be installed one and be rotated through each of the pumps? So every time that we avoid throttling through, for instance, the use of VFD, you have a higher capital improvement, a higher capital cost, but it significantly reduces the operational cost of the facility because you're no longer throttling and burning energy with your valve, but rather using the less energy to start with. And it's also more beneficial to the pump not to start
soft
hard, but you get that soft start of the VFD that ramps up the frequency. But that type of analysis usually happens on a capital improvement project or program that you analyze the whole facility as opposed to replacing in kind.
Yep. That
That you don't do any analysis, you simply, it broke and you get the latest version of the model. So that's why I don't know if we have that in mind to do an overall assessment of this particular facility.
Yeah, for me, I would broaden it, Board Member Garcia. What I would say is that we should look at, and this is something that the three of us are taking notes on. I think your comments are well taken. Looking at our sanitary district system, which is 19 pump stations, I believe. The flood control system is 10 pump stations. And so what I would do is I would look to do an assessment, kind of an objective assessment of how each of those two systems are operating. And we can probably for, a few $10,000s come up with a report that says, okay, here's how your current operating, here's room for efficiencies, here's some of your life cycle cost analysis, here's from the systems and operations standpoint, how you might be able to improve. That to me sounds like, a great idea. So we'll make note of that and look into it.
Thank you.
Yeah, it sounds like the time is right with the age of this equipment. It sounds like it's going to be, just keeping it as is, or we're going to take it to the next level. And it sounds like a good opportunity at this time.
Thank you. High Canal Bank repairs.
We're going to
We're gonna go to
No, number A,
yeah,
letter A.
go back to A.
Oh,
So this would be
Marina
the,
Village.
Yeah,
Yes.
Marina
Yep.
Village storm drain improvements.
My hood.
So, since the last meeting in March, this project went out to bid, and here's a summary of the results. So Team Gelati's been out there working since about mid-June. They're getting near toward completion. Here are just some costs, just to give you an idea. The overall project is just under 600,000, and to kind of put that in perspective, it's about 1,600 lineal feet of curb and gutter that is getting the slotted drain added. It's about $355 to $390 per linear foot, or if you take each household at say 50 feet wide, it's almost 20,000 per frontage. So just keep that in mind as kind of we think about these projects in the future. If they're, I think this is the third one now, and how we want to fund or not fund these as we go forward. Yeah, typical curb and gutter comparison, it's about $25 a lineal foot for a standard curb and gutter. So, quite a bit more. Each slotted drain has a custom kind of trough, and I can go into that as we move on to some other slides. So this is just a overview of the most recent project and the locations. So on the left side, you'll have the Nugget Market and Paradise Drive, and it kind of takes, you can kind of see where the lines are a little bolder. It's, you've got the Harbor Drive length, or straight part, bulk of that, and then a little dog leg to the left, and then it ends as it kind of makes that turn. And then it also makes a couple storm drain improvements down at Yolo Street.
So just a quick question, is that a gravity-only system, or does that go down into like some sort of a catch basin pump station type of situation?
So the slotted drains, I think if I move on, that'll help. So this is, these are the slotted drains that you're seeing on the surface, and those will then feed into the storm drain system that's further down, larger pipes. And then that's a gravity system that goes to either check valves or pump stations throughout the various locations these have been installed.
yeah, I think in this case, the majority of it drains to the end of Harbor and out into that quasi-wetland that's protected by levees. There's a little bit that drains at the end of Echo, and it's all gravity drainage out into a catch basin at those points. At some point, it may need to have a pump station installed in it if there's more settlement and there's trouble getting it to drain into that wetlands.
So yeah, just a snapshot. It's 2 concrete pours to install the piece on the left, and then you obviously have some paving conforms to make the road nice and smooth again. But overall, it's a gravity system and somewhat straightforward.
Mhm.
These are some progress photos from today. So on the left side, that photo is a section that was just poured. You can see the concrete there is pretty fresh. And then the 2 photos in the middle on the right are basically complete. And so talking to the contractor out there today, they think they'll be wrapped up by about this time next week.
Great.
Yeah.
That's good.
So no complications?
No, nothing significant. You know, occasional minor adjustment here or there, but overall pretty straightforward. So it's the same contractor who's gotten, I believe, all 3 projects, and the same designer who's been involved in all 3. So I think they got it down.
We did have one anecdotal story. We got a call last week, and there was a neighbor who was concerned that one of the contractors was illegally dumping concrete into the storm drain, and that it would, go out to the bay, and should we come out immediately and prevent them from doing that? And I thought of the address, and I'm like, I think they're actually supposed to be pouring concrete in that location, but we double checked, and sure enough, they were laying out the system. So we had to let the concerned neighbor know that there's no need for worry. We're not pouring concrete and blocking the storm drainage system. So, but yeah, the community, some of the other commentary we've gotten is, you stopped the project too soon. You didn't quite come to my house. And so, that's going to be a constant, question that we'll wrestle with your board as well as council, in terms of, the whole neighborhood, I think at some point or another, is going to be interested in these projects, and whether or not it's viable to install slotted drains in the whole neighborhood is, a question I think we know the answer to. So it's just a matter of how far we go, and we'll certainly look to your input on that, and as well as council. So.
Yeah, I think the plan has been to put the slotted drains in where there's significant street ponding, and the other people that are complaining really don't have street ponding in front of their house. They just want a nice, new, fresh-looking curb and gutter. And I think we need to save our money to put these in where they're needed.
Sure, and
I agree with you completely on that.
the other point, Chair Bundy, may be that we may not have enough funds to put in everywhere where there's ponding. That's that's another issue we may have to face. That's all. So,
As a resident of that street Echo, I've also received those questions and explained, just as you did, that it's meant to address the ponding, it's not meant to go everywhere. And somewhat related, I did provide an answer to a resident that was, I think, about their sidewalk, that they were notified that their sidewalk was not safe, and in the past, it was somewhat acceptable to, if the neighbor could approach the contractor to see if they could contract privately for them to redo the sidewalk. Do you know if that has been done?
So there was one instance on this project where that was coordinated, and so we can put them in touch with the contractor. The contractor, it's up to them if they
Understood.
choose to do the work. But yeah, sure.
Fine.
Would you kindly put that as slide again, the one with the cross section?
Sure.
Is there any concern with debris getting inside, accumulating at the invert and blocking the flow? And if so, is there any way to flush it out with?
Yeah, so those are designed to slope at about 6%, which is pretty good for a gravity system. But I believe they do get flushed out. I think it's once or twice a year by the maintenance crews.
But there's no dedicated line inside. They just get open and flush out with a hose.
Yeah, I believe so with the hose.
we also use our VACCon and our street sweeper, which it's a lot easier. When we pull the grate, we can pull anything out of there in a matter of seconds. So yeah, we
Yes.
do regular maintenance.
If you go to the other drawing, you'll see there's these catch basins every so often that are graded, right? And that's where they do the vacuuming. It's not the whole length. It's just where there's a grate that they can remove, and I imagine the debris collects there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions regarding that? High Canal Bank repairs.
Okay. So here's a project location. You got the Sandra Market Trail, and then just south of that pedestrian bridge, there's one large repair, the one at the largest oval there at the bottom, the yellow oval, and then that one we believe failed in winter of, was that 2017? 17, and so primarily we started the project wanting to fix that, and then as we were out there, we noticed 3 other small ones that we thought we were there. We're doing the design work. We're doing the permitting. Let's fix those as well. So here's just a photo of each of those. So the one on the left being the larger one, the one on the right being an example of the 3 smaller ones. And so we've had meetings with the environmental resource agencies, U.S. Fish or California Fish and Wildlife, Regional Board, Marin Resource Conservation District, and I know I'm forgetting one other. And they've helped us kind of prepare for what they would require as part of the environmental permitting. What makes this site a little interesting or unique is that it is controlled by the pumps and the tide gates there at Doherty. So when we actually took these photos, we had drawn the tide down to a couple feet to allow for better photos and better survey work to really figure out the slopes and whatnot of the bank there. But it just takes a different approach to how you look at the hydrology and how you design the repair such that it can still remain stable even in the max condition, which is mainly probably relied on the pumps and whatnot. So one of the things that the resource agencies had pushed for was for us to use bioengineering as much as possible. There was a similar repair done on the northern side of the pedestrian bridge. If you've been out there, where you have the marsh on one side, it's where Redwood High School is, and that was riprap all the way to the top of the slope. And that's been a pretty common repair for decades. And as of recently, they've really tried to ask us to incorporate bioengineering, and to the point where if you don't, then they may ask for mitigation measures. And so one thought is, we know we need riprap in the lower half to 2/3 because we need to resist the water forces, but in the upper section, we could probably still have a stable slope by doing what's kind of a geogrid, engineered geogrid repair, and then we'd vegetate the outside with some brackish plants that are suitable for that area. So this is kind of the design concept that we'll be submitting to the resource agencies here in the next couple weeks, and hope to get their permission to proceed with the work. The print's a little tight, so if there's something of interest, feel free to let me know.
Questions, comments? So RJ, the usual water level is about at the top of the riprap?
Yeah, and we're still doing our hydrology analysis. It's possible the riprap could go maybe another foot above that, just kind of an extra safe measure, but it's going to be in that vicinity, right?
Okay.
Is this considered like any kind of like a animal habitat?
Well, there's definitely tons of animals there, and then potentially 1 or 2 that are federally listed species.
Yeah.
So
Well, the reason I
something-
ask is I know of a project that was on the Russian River, and there was like funding from agencies that are, looking to improve habitat with geoengineering or bioengineering, some name
Yeah.
like that. And they put in like fish, resting places where they could get in the shade under logs and things like that. And I just throw that out as a kind of a general question, is like, just in terms of there's funding available for those types of projects.
Sure, certainly. I think they would probably view this, I think what you're referring to is a restoration project.
Yeah,
of
like
some
for
sort.
salmon and for steelhead, things like that.
Yeah.
And I guess I don't think this canal has any of that
Yeah.
at this point.
Yeah, so it's, Yeah, it probably is more of a repair project, but while we're repairing it, let's do the best we can to.
Yeah, I'm glad to
be,
see you doing this stuff.
sure.
This is a great step in the right direction. Yeah, as opposed to just stacks of rocks, which is
Yeah.
what they used to do, right?
Right, and it's just finding that balance between, solid engineering and incorporating the environmental friendly elements that you can.
Could you restate the resource agencies? It's mostly just my professional curiosity.
Yeah, California Fish and Wildlife, California Regional Water Quality Control Board, Army Corps is another one that has jurisdiction. They have the option to involve NIMS, National Marine Fisheries, and then we also brought in Marin Resource Conservation District for some additional comment and assistance.
Thank you.
Okay. Climate adaptation grant.
Yeah, so this is project that we got federal funds for. I believe it's $325,000. This is a fancy map of saying, all of Corte Madera is going to be considered, at least initially. And then we have kind of some specific objectives that we're kind of looking toward. And Peter, you want to go through that first, or you want me to take a?
Yeah, just take a quick stab.
Yeah, so certainly, sea level rise is one that's going to be on the top of everyone's list, but also this project's going to look at several other things, as warning systems and basically looking at emergency preparedness, and in particular, it's going to be focused on how we can look at and maintain and improve transportation infrastructure. So those are just some of the kind of guidelines. And then the bottom bullet is more or less the deliverable. We hope to have some outcomes, some priorities, some projects that we can, really sink our teeth into and start to develop at a more detailed level. And so, yeah, those are some of the current guidelines, but it's, as we are now, it's a pretty broad scope. We really want to start broad and focus in and get more narrow as we work through it. It's a multi-year project.
Yeah, RJ, thanks for that. And the things I'll add, we would like to get it done in a 2-year time frame. That's what our current scope is. It's a Caltrans, just minor correction. It's a state-funded, not federally funded. It's Caltrans SB1 funds. So, hopefully those funds are still intact if that SB1 repeal goes to the ballot in November. We'll know more after that. But for the $325,000 will be allocated. Caltrans is the funding source, and so they're certainly interested in this transportation system. So that'll definitely get its due attention. The primary assets there are obviously Paradise Drive, Redwood Highway, and US 101. And then, of course, our interchanges on and off ramps along Highway 101. So those assets carry enough value both locally and regionally and statewide, as a matter of fact, connecting to San Francisco, that those are pretty easy to predetermine that some level of protection will be a result. However, there's also a lot of other areas of town, residential neighborhoods, the marshland, to what level and with what strategies do we do restoration there or protection? And then, because climate change adaptation isn't just about sea level rise, we also have to look at other areas of the community in terms of vulnerability and risk to, wildfire or deluge or, flooding from coming off of Mount Tam. And so there's lots of things that, as RJ mentioned, it's a broad scope, but I think when we get into it, we're going to have 3 public meetings at least that are in the scope. So we'll be seeking community input. And I think at least at one point, maybe mid or 3/4 of the way through the process, we'll come back to likely BPAC, Flood Board, and Planning Commission just to seek further input. But I'm excited about it, mostly because it's going to serve as a a guide for the town, for the decision makers and for the staff and for the citizens in terms of how we should adapt. One thing that the professionals will tell you, it's, sea level rise isn't something that may come, it's something that is coming. It's like gravity. We know about it. We see it every day. And so, it's something that we're happy to be on the cutting edge. I think there was 2 of these grants that were funded in Marin County. The County of Marin Public Works Department also got a grant to look at the Manzanita area down in Mill Valley and the bike path along there, which flood regularly. So we'll also be partnering with them in terms of resources and strategies to make sure that, we don't do anything duplicative, and rather we could share ideas and resources with the county system as well. So we wanted to update you on that. Happy to take any questions on the climate adaptation grant.
Is the intent to hire consultants to do this work, or is it going to be developed in-house?
Yeah, we'll be hiring a consultant. We'll be issuing an RFP, a request for proposals, and we'll be out on the streets for several weeks. People to prepare, put together a team, put together a proposal. Likely will be interviews, and we'll end up with a team that hopefully is, highly qualified and can do a great job for us.
And following up on your comment earlier about coordination, is it worthwhile to consider a joint RFP for a consultant or JV team that can analyze both, or will it be completely separate and they will just share information?
Yeah, I think I envision it more of the latter. I would have to go back to Caltrans and figure out if they would be okay with the joint. It gets a little more difficult in terms of the county's objectives. I think their objectives are much more in line with Caltrans' core mission in terms of the transportation system and the multimodal system, the bike path and the park and ride lot in 101. For us, what they don't have is kind of this upland town-wide component that our grant will have. But yeah, as far as I know, RJ and I have spent quite a bit of time on the phone with Caltrans and their reps, and I'm not sure about a joint RFP at this point.
What I'm thinking is that even though the solutions or the examples on the project would be significantly different based on location and the particularities of the terrain and all that, but there's a lot of effort that is usually put on the front end regarding identifying the risk and setting out criteria for those risks, and those could be the same, even though the impact would be different. That's what I was thinking. If one can analyze what's going to be the sea level rise height and spend a lot of money and effort thinking of that, but if that can be consolidated, then we could save on having a common, consistent approach about what the threats are.
Yeah. As you all well know, sea level rise is a global thing. We have local variabilities. I think that it's really interesting that the East Coast is experiencing it more than the West Coast in terms of overall measurement. I don't think that we're going to ask this consultant to do any original research when it comes to risk assessment. We have a risk assessment. I think Marin County's risk assessment has been done. We're looking to rely on a lot of that front end work. And then for this grant, really to hone in on, what it means for Corte Madera. How do we apply what we believe is going to be happening in order to protect our resources, restore our marshland, determine, where we may want to relinquish or retreat. Those type of bigger questions, I think, will be really important for the local, community to decide. And when I say local, as you saw on RJ's map, we are looking to look all the way out to Corte Madera Creek. And so, partnering and looping with, the county and Santa Fe and Larkspur will be interesting and necessary for this. The same thing when we do our public outreach, it's just the invite's not just going to go to Corte Madera residents, but residents all along the waterfront here.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And just one addition to your comment about combining, when you do get grants through Caltrans in particular, they have additional restrictions, and so sometimes, and if you have a separate project that combines with the grant funds, then that project also comes with those restrictions. So it's just something to be conscious of. You basically, anything you attach to the project also follows the restrictions usually.
I see.
Keith, any comments?
No.
David? Stephanie?
Yeah. So the first bullet on the previous slide and kind of building on Ramon, you mentioned new studies. I just recall, I know with respect to your being new, but 2-3 years ago, there was a presentation made to us by Baywave or something that did, so you're aware of that vulnerability assessment. I just didn't want you to repeat something that's already been done and utilize, not have to redo work. All right.
The one comment I was going to make, it seems like this really needs to be a transportation-related project, and if Noble Consulting was interested in this, the people that are looking at the levees, while the levees protect Marina Village, the rest of the levees protect Redwood Highway, and this might be a good fit. And the talk about combining is that if we combined with Larkspur and the county to run things all the way to the Corte Madera Creek, that would be something that would fit into this grant, right?
No, I think, Chair Bundy, what we were talking about was the county got around a $450,000 grant specifically to look at Manzanita Park and Ride Lot, the 101 there, as well as the Sausalito Mill Valley Bike Path. So that is county jurisdiction, and the county got the same grant. I think there were 26 applications statewide. They got one, we got one. And so I think, Board Member Garcia's point was, well, if you have $800,000 instead of $300,000 and you put that together, you might be able to get more bang for your buck, which is, I think if we were in the private sector and we had less strings attached and less governing agencies and less quarterly reports, that might be more easier to pull off than dealing with the state DOT.
Okay, got you.
Yeah.
I had one question. So we had talked about there's some flooding that happens on the off-ramp right before the consignment center, and then on the on-ramp heading north on 101. Do those issues play into this project at all or not at all?
I would rather those get done on a maintenance near term than wait for a 2-year analysis. I think the flooding that you all have talked about multiple times and I've talked about with District 4 is more about a few $20,000, $30,000 storm drain fix, and so that's something that I'm hoping we can get done prior to this grant.
So is that the town of Corte Madera's issue, or is that Caltrans?
It's our residents' issue, but it's Caltrans jurisdiction. So our residents go through it when it's
Right.
flooded, but it's Caltrans responsibility. And so we'll continue to remind them of the need. And it may take, bring in some of their management out to see it firsthand when it's flooded. So I'll be on top of it this winter.
And have they had any feedback so far, or they haven't even seen it or discussed it? Or
No, they've seen it. I've brought it up to them in meetings. As many of you know, we're looking at kind of the pre-project initiation document phase for the Caltrans US 101 and Tamalpais interchange. And your former mayor, Diane First, as well as myself, have brought it up to Caltrans that, it doesn't need to wait for that interchange redesign. It doesn't need to wait for this grant. It's a pretty easy early fix. It's just a matter of, Caltrans District 4 is all around the Bay Area, and they got, thousands of pieces of infrastructure, in fairness to them, that they're looking to maintain. And so it's just a matter of getting ourselves up on their radar and getting someone out here to fix the drainage issue.
Thanks.
Well, Peter, I think you did a good job of getting Corte Madera on the radar. You got them out there to take out those dead trees, and so that's a start.
Yeah.
They're at least working in that area, so hopefully they'll take on the other part of it too.
Agreed. Yeah.
Another question for this grant, is the project limited to the funds available, or put another way, could the town of Corte Madera determine that this investigation is going to cost more than the 325, and then get 325 from the state, and then augment the difference with our own funding?
Yeah, that's a good question, Board Member Garcia. The way it's currently allocated is it's a $200,000 cash grant from Caltrans, and the town is putting in $125,000.
Got it.
Given that, we certainly, let's say we put out an RFP, and we get some proposals for a really great project at the 350 or 400 range, and that's the best consultant that we could find, I would be happy to come back to council and ask for their permission to fund such a project. But if that doesn't happen, typically what we like to do is give anyone bidding, some idea, like kind of like the engineer's estimate you saw,
Right.
so that they know what target they're going after. My opinion for a town of this size, and with all the pre-work that's been done, the risk assessment that's been done, Bay Waves, our CoStar Future, the county's risk assessment, we have a lot of data. And so I think for that $325,000 range, we should be able to get a pretty good project. But the short answer to your question is yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Golden Hind tidal flooding at ebb tide.
Yeah, so this is it's a bit of an update on one of the designs that's around 90% right now. So that's a project location right there at ebb tide. So this one's a little hard to read, and but what we were trying to show is we do have elevations of the whole neighborhood out there, and that pump station location is actually the lowest by several feet. As you go further north on Golden Hind or further south, it actually rises up against it. So it's, kind of in a natural belly.
Let me just take a quick moment to walk you all through, because as RJ said, these are a little hard to read, but in terms of elevations from our survey, 3.3 feet, 3.6, 3.2 feet, 5.2, 5.4, 4.4. So this is, a handful of feet above sea level, and in between these two homes is the pump station. And as you go in any direction, you may not know it being out there, but you're going from 6'3", 6'4", 6'4", 6'6", 6'6", and it kind of stays at 6'6" up here. If you head up ebb tide, it really quickly goes from 4'2" to 5'6" to 5'7" to 6'3" to 6'3". So the point of this is that this really is a low point in the whole neighborhood. And so I just wanted everyone to kind of see the elevation numbers. If you go in any direction away from this point, you're gaining elevation. So.
And kind of to dovetail with the previous comments on the previous project, these are pieces of data that we have for most of the town. So if there's, something as part of that climate adaptation grant that could benefit from this information, then we already have this. So these are just a couple photos that I was able to gather, although I've heard, it definitely gets worse, but you can see definitely ponding of the curb gutter and getting to portions of the parking area and almost breaching the sidewalk there in the top left photo.
There was a puddle there the other day. I was walking my dog, and I don't
Yeah.
know if that was tidal. I mean, it had to be,
Uh-huh.
right? It
Mr.
was
Garcia,
odd on the that
you
left
pass that
side.
along. This
The
was taken in
evening
July.
tides have been high.
Yeah.
This was a king tide in July.
Yeah.
There you go.
I remember that day. Yep. Thanks.
So one of the main goals of this project is to add a pump station. And so right now it's just a gravity system with check valves. And when there's water in the streets and the tide is low enough, the gravity will flow out through the check valve, and it'll drain itself. This is talking about adding a pump station in there that can force the water out. And so this photo is just to give a little, set the frame for the next photo. So you're looking down at the existing pump station area, and you got the marsh on your right. This is the same view, but in kind of a plan schematic. So just once more time, we'll bounce back. So you got the road there on your left, marsh on your right, north is up. And so you can see a gray dashed set of lines that represents kind of the existing storm drain. And let's see.
Can you point that
Yeah,
out,
there we go.
Peter?
There we go. Yeah. So here's
Okay, there we go. Thank you.
existing storm drain here, and it's all gravity. And then here's where the marsh starts, and you've got that check valve, the duct-bill check valve. So this is all new here. This is a new wet well with 2 pumps, and it would tie in. This would be a new pipe, and it would tie into the existing storm drain system that runs up and down the roadway. And so this wet well would be set to, the optimum elevations to fire on to push water out of the storm drain out into the marsh area. I don't know if everyone was on the email thread recently about kind of when this is going to benefit versus when it may not, but water at high tides is kind of flowing around this pump station, and in instances of really high tide, the pump station isn't going to do a whole lot because it's like pumping water from one side of a bathtub to the other. If we had a levee, and we were pumping to the other side of a levee, then it'd be a different situation. The benefit would be, though, that it certainly drains the roadway quicker, and then areas where the water isn't breaching over those properties, it would be able to pump them out. So just something to consider.
Go back to your previous
Sure.
slide. So again, I'm just getting up to speed. I do believe that this is a relatively new addition here. I don't know how many numbers of years, maybe Chair Bundy, but what happens now is because, as we showed you in the elevation map, when the tide comes up, the 2 of the lowest points for water to flow are along the pump station and next to these 2 homes out into the street. It's also happening at high tide for about 3 or 4 houses in either direction to some level or another. I believe before this pump station was built, and obviously it's asphalt, it's been elevated a little bit, this served more as a swale where the flooding would come through, maybe more so in this location than 3 or 4 houses up or down. But certainly one thing that does happen is during high tide, when the water does come, and the picture I showed you on my computer was just showing that there's like one little piece of road that was an island, and everything else, the sidewalks included, is all underwater. And so the point that RJ is making is one of the things that we need to consider when we do our cost benefit on this is that by installing this pump station here, when water is flowing in, if we start pumping it out, and the water is still coming in, we have to do an assessment of whether or not our pump can keep up with the tide. Probably can't. But on the other hand, if we were to pump it at max capacity, we could certainly clear the road quicker after the tide went down. So maybe, without a pump, it might be flooded for 8 or 10 hours. With the flump, maybe it's 4 to 8 hours. We haven't done that assessment. But just something kind of for you all to have a mental picture of how the water's coming in and how we might pump it out.
Yeah. RJ, do you have a sense of why the check valve isn't working? That the tide seems to go through the gravity drain without any benefit of that check valve. And I think if we did have the check valve at work and the pump, that the immediate neighbors would be able to berm up next to the pump station and probably keep the water out until you got to have a tide of about, maybe 7.6 or something, or 7.4. But right now, that catch basin starts filling up at, I think, a 6.8 tide or something like that.
So we just did a quick visual inspection on the check valve, and yeah, there's a slight gap that some water can go in, but it's not what we're seeing on the other side, which means the water's likely getting in, either just permeating through the ground, or some other method. But I think the valve is doing an okay job. It's really something else is acting on the system.
I mean, that you may be right that there's so many perforations through that with the various pipes and things like that it comes in, but the catch basin and the street does start to fill up before it comes, over land and gets there. So what do we do about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so it's a good point. We can take a closer look at that and get an idea of, if it was sealed, real tight, if that would be a benefit. So, in any case, if the pump does go forward, that valve does go away, the duckbill valve. The pumps, I guess, would be the ones that would, I think a separate check valve would be installed in lieu of that duckbill.
Okay.
Yeah. It would actually, if you see it here, you would install, I believe it's right here, a check valve over here, so as the pumps go on, they aren't pumping it to the left and the right. There's something to stop the flow this direction to make sure it all goes out to the marsh.
My understanding is that they had actually tried a check valve in the catch basin at one point, but perhaps because the catch basin was broken up and things permeated through there, it was of no benefit. Now, this was what I was sort of told, but, I didn't see a formal report on that.
Yeah, I had a brief conversation with a consultant, and they were just saying that it's extremely easy to put a check valve in, a brand new check valve in on a brand new manhole, but anytime you're trying to retrofit one or repair one or fit one in a manhole that doesn't have it, it's problematic.
So is it possible that catch basin just needs to be replaced completely with a new catch basin?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that one.
I think, Chair Bundy, that's one potential outcome. The other thing to think about is if indeed we're getting, I would call it subterranean intrusion at this location, we don't really know, and we can investigate, and it sounds like we should come out there during a high tide and just kind of get down below the street and find out where we can see the water coming in. It may be at the catch basin, it may be up or downstream, it may be that the water's come in through saturated soil underneath the homes. We're not 100% sure. We do know the water comes in, and we do know that we would be racing hard to install a pump station here and to pump it back out to the marsh in the high tides. I would call that a limited return on investment, that particular solution. But I think based on the comments and our own curiosity, we should do a little more investigation to see if we can find out and pinpoint where the water's coming in.
Sure.
Yeah, there should be some high tides, during a daylight where you can really see what's going on at some point. So stay tuned for this winter.
Any other questions on that one?
Thank you.
Yes. You're welcome.
Anything else, future agenda items?
Can we put on, or are we somehow gonna circle back to the on-ramp and off-ramp situation?
I
Does
think
that not need to be on the agenda?
maybe Peter can keep us updated on that as he beats his head against the Caltrans door.
I will take this meeting as an opportunity to, for what I've been doing is I get comments and questions from community members. In fact, if you send me an email, I can use that as an impetus to forward it along to District 4 and say I'm getting continued questions, which I am, about the fix, and we'd love to see it happen, for this rainy season. But I will keep reminding them. I don't think we need to agendize it, but we can definitely keep you in the loop.
Great.
I know that it's a fine balance, the diplomacy versus pushing, but in your discussions with Caltrans, are they all verbal, which are important and necessary, or has the town produced a written request or document or concern?
I personally have done about half a dozen written requests, and I brought it up in multiple meetings, so I may have blown my chance at diplomacy on this one. But I also haven't gotten a formal response that they've assessed it or that they have a timeline or anything. I mean, I think I can still ask them, if it's part of their CIP, is it a maintenance issue for them? Is it something they've done a cost estimate on? I think those are all still fair questions. And they may tell us it's not a district priority, and we'll look at it in 3 or 4 years, in which case that would be information for us at least.
Is that usually with the public administration, I mean, we're still human, so the verbal communication goes a long way, but eventually the way to escalate this is through the emails, but then eventually maybe even from the town of Corte Madera issues a letter just saying, we have been concerned about this, our residents' safety issue, and it's the written record that really matters, and if it has the stamp of the town, it has more weight than anything else.
Got it.
The other item, and talk to RJ about it, is just keep us updated on the levy study that's going on from Noble Consulting, and also to look at the idea of we temporarily put sandbags out 3 years ago. They've deteriorated. The idea of replacing those or adding sandbags that will function as sandbags. Right now, it's just a pile of sand out there.
Well, let me add to that, Chairman Bob, Bundy. A couple ideas for future. Sandbags will be a great temporary, but we need to, I think there's been an effort, and it was called a LiDAR study.
That's part of the Noble Consulting's look at all of the levies and what to do to raise those up. That's the one I was referring to keep us updated on that study.
Okay. Because I really regret missing the March meeting, and I guess I'm sure it's obvious to be kept up to date on this. I guess, is Noble this tidal barrier project? Is that separate?
No, it's the levy project.
I know, but
I don't think it's on here.
no, I'm looking at the March meeting. There
Oh,
was
sorry.
a presentation from Tidal Barrier Project from Rachel Kamen, coastal engineer. Oh, the Noble Consultant, so that's probably the same thing. And throw out an idea to the whole board, especially with new leadership, if it's worth to revisit and maybe reword the charter for this board.
Okay. And just look at the charter and see if we still fulfill that, or should we go to more of a climate adaptation strategy? Is that what you're thinking?
Are we fulfilling the charter, or does the charter need to be rewritten to really reflect the needs of the town?
It's a good thought. Look at the charter again. Any other thoughts?
There's, the Corte Madera Marsh is eroding, and that, I think, has some, the marsh in general, I think they say has benefit toward flood control, right? Isn't that true? It absorbs a lot more of the moisture, and when it's not there, we're just up against the bay, right? So it's better to have more marsh than less. And so in the 20-plus years I've lived here, I've noticed that marsh is going, further inland. And I know there's some, studies about trying to restore marshland. And so to me, that would be more maybe beneficial information as far as what's going on in terms of marsh restoration or retention, as opposed to just watching that thing continue to erode, which, we do. So that, to me, would be something I'd be
Yes,
interested in.
you make a good point. There's a lot of effort to restore wetlands and at great cost. And here we have really valuable, useful wetlands that are eroding, and we can't do anything about it.
I will look into what we can do in terms of a future agenda item for that. I do think that the climate adaptation grant is specifically going to be charged with determining, what the best solution is in terms of using the marsh as a resource and restoring the marsh and having it act as a buffer for wave attenuation and everything else in terms of 101, because it is certainly has those properties. The one thing for the flood board to be aware of is the most common way to use marshland or wetland for sea level rise preparation is to create upland retreat area for the marsh to go into. So if you think about sea level rise coming up, in order to have a marsh really be effective, you have to create the biological conditions whereby, as sea level rise does come up, the marsh can grow into the inland environment. There's a few places in town and along this waterfront where that's possible, but we also have really hard restrictions like, the village and US 101. So we're not going to pick those up and move them inland, because then we'd have to sit them both down right on top of town hall. So those are really big questions, and it's something that again, because it's on my radar and it'll be in our RFP, we will specifically ask for some recommendations on the best method for marsh restoration and how it can benefit the town in terms of livability and economic resources and the transportation system as well. So.
And because it really benefits the entire Bay Area, it's going to require grants and other money way beyond what Corte Madera can actually provide. We're going to look at AA money and all other sources that we can get our hands on for something like that. So, good point. Anything else? Meeting adjourned.